Your
Hello,
microphone has
everyone.
been turned
I'd like to
on.
welcome you to the ABPMP webinar series. And today we will be talking with, actually, the person who will be talking, I should say, is Andrew Spanyi. And the subject of today's webinar will be leading process change. I'll start off with a little bit about Andrew. Andrew received a Bachelor's of Arts degree from Brock University and earned his MBA from York University of Toronto. He's a he is the founder of Spanyi International. He founded it in 1992. And from 1992 through 2000, he also worked with Rumler Braish. Andrew's been working on process improvements throughout that time since 1992 and currently is still active. And one of the things that he is active in is the association and ABPMP, where he first of all chaired the first educational committee for the association. He's also a member of the ABPMP advisory board. He's the author of several books on BPM and related topics and over 80 articles in both print and electronic magazines. And he's worked on over 150 projects transforming different parts of businesses in multiple industries. So at this point, I'd like to, first of all, go through just a little bit of housekeeping and then turn it over to Andrew. And that housekeeping is, the first thing is that for the most part, we will hold questions until the end of the presentation. Also, I'd like to let everyone know that the presentation will be put on the ABPMP website. And so that if you'd like to listen to it again or share it with friends, recommend it to different people, it will be out on the website. It probably takes about 2 days for it to get out there, but it'll be out there for everyone's review and use in the future. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Andrew, and welcome, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Dan. Really appreciate it. Great to be here. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have the pleasure of talking about leading process change today. And basically the agenda is I'll have a brief introduction. I'd like to share with you some of my research when I was at Babson College on leading process change. Share with you 3 examples, 1 example of success and 2 examples of failure, because I think we can learn as much, sometimes more, from examples of failure than we can from examples of success. And then talk to you about some of the success factors and do a wrap-up where I will refer to some of the recent literature on business transformation and leading change. So that's the agenda. As Dan mentioned, please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A block. And if I can, I will certainly do my best to answer them. So by way of introduction, just to add to what Dan has already said, I've been working in the process field actually for pretty close to 24 years. My thoughts were influenced significantly by Dr. Gary Rumler and Mr. Alan Braish, who wrote the classic book, Improving Performance, Managing the White Spaces on Organization Chart. And I owned 1/3 of Rumler Braish in Canada for quite a few years in the 90s. When I went out on my own in the 2000s, I focused on the theme of collaboration and creating value for customers in larger process projects. Most recently, I've been contributing chapters to books such as the Handbook on Business Process Management. So if you take the ABPMP body of knowledge and you purchase these 2 books from Springer, you're going to have about 1,000 pages of information on BPM, and everyone will think that you know it all, especially if you put it on the corner of your desk. My work at Babson College, I taught both in the MBA program and the executive education program with a focus on process management. And as Dan mentioned, I've been with ABPMP for quite some time. The fact of the matter is, and you probably know this, the track record on leading process change and business transformation is pretty dismal. Only about a third of major change programs succeed. It's been that way since the mid-90s. John Cotter, who is the author of Leading Change, basically estimated that statistic in 1995. In the 90s, the critics of reengineering emphasized that only about a third of reengineering efforts succeeded, and Dr. Hammer acknowledged that. And in 2008, a broad-based survey by McKinsey of nearly 3,200 executives found that only 1 in 3 transformations succeed. And by the way, since then, I think in 2012 and 2013, other well-recognized consulting organizations have replicated such surveys. The Standish Group used to publish a report called the Chaos Report, and they reported that only about 32, 34, 36% of projects were delivered on time, on budget, and if we were to focus only on the large-scale IT projects, then it would be even a more disappointing statistic. In fact, in my 23, 24 years of work in this field, I have only seen 1 large ERP project with a single instance of SAP being implemented on time and below budget. A 2010 article in Harvard Business Review also suggested that as many as 60% of corporate Six Sigma initiatives failed to yield the advertised or desired results. So pretty dismal findings, and it's important, more important now than ever, to become better at leading process change. Forrester, James McQuivey from Forrester wrote this book, The Digital Disruption, and he claims that incremental improvement, while necessary, is no longer sufficient. And I found that interesting because Dr. Tom Davenport in 1993, in his book, Process Innovation, claimed exactly the same thing. So here we are, like 22 years later, and we're still finding the same focus. But I do agree with Forrester. Digital disruption has the potential to create great innovation power, but I believe that leading process change and leading transformation must be married with the digital capabilities, and I'll talk more about that in our wrap-up. As we all know, for those of us who are members of ABPMP, the customer-focused end-to-end business process view of the world allows organizations to accomplish things that a functional view simply cannot. But it does amount to turning the organization on its side, maybe even on its head at times, as Dr. Davenport said in 1993. And what bothers me a little bit in terms of the whole topic of leading process change is I've seen in the past, I don't know, half a dozen to a dozen years, this shift to more of incremental improvement as opposed to the large-scale process redesign efforts that I used to do and still do from time to time. And I'm not quite sure what that is due to, but I suspect that the deployment of Six Sigma is one factor, where so many Six Sigma deployments are deployed by department, with executive sponsors and champions by department and master black belts by department, and therefore they leave these huge nuggets of gold on the ground because it's really the handoffs from one department to another in these end-to-end processes that really matters. And maybe another factor is the introduction of the new BPM suites, the technology, where we want to succeed. And of course, if we scope our projects by department, then there are fewer cross-functional issues to address. But certainly the traditional view of business process change would look at the end-to-end view. A customer-focused business process context is what's really required. So let's bear that in mind as we go ahead. And now we've known for some time that there is no direct causal relationship between the tools and techniques examined and outstanding business performance. And in a book called What Really Works way back in 2003, it was found that it doesn't much matter whether an organization chooses to deploy Six Sigma reengineering, PQM, ABC, or continuous improvement. What really matters is that the companies that excel at improving performance, they will focus on strategic alignment, execution, shifting culture, and a flat structure. And they're the organizations that seem to outperform their peers. So that's the end of my introduction. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about my research at Babson. Even though it was nearly a decade ago, I have continued to focus on this research, and the findings are valid to this day. The research I did at Babson while I was part of the Babson College Process Management Research Center was called the Mindset Study. And the focus was to explore the role of executive mindsets in enabling a company-wide business process improvement and management focus. And this actually formed the basis of my book, More for Less, The Power of Process Management. I talked with 18 different organizations, mainly in the USA and Europe. Actually, there was one from Australia as well. My respondents were generally VP-level people in the functional areas of finance, operations, and IT. And my research was qualitative research, so I wasn't data-based, but was qualitative research. And the kind of questions I asked is, what has contributed to your success, and, what obstacles did you have to overcome, so forth and so on. And I found that out of the 18 firms, there were just a handful that were really leading firms, that they really seemed to get it. And the common characteristics of these leading firms were that, I lost the animation on that slide. The common characteristics of these leading firms were, first of all, they were focused on customers. In fact, the leading firms mentioned the term customer 3 times more often than the firms who were the average firms in that regard. Then, the leading firms had a dedicated champion. The leading firms had a dedicated champion, and this champion was rarely, if ever, the CEO. It was typically someone who reported to the CEO, but an advocate of customer focus and process change. The third common characteristic was that the leading firms had a real or perceived threat. Maybe it was flattening growth. Maybe it was the entrance of new competitors, but that was a common characteristic. The fourth common characteristic was that the leading firms had a receptive culture. They had a long history of playing around with different process improvement methods. And last, but certainly not least, the leading firms had a supportive, vocal senior executive. So those were the common characteristics of the leading firms. And here is the animation that's coming in now. So these are the 5 points that I outlined. But what the leading firms did was very interesting. They used simple, visually compelling models for both customer experience and process change. They measured the things that matter to customers, which are typically timeless and quality, and that was dramatically different than the average firm that tended to measure cost and volume. They attempted to implement governance for process performance via process owners or stewards. They tried to integrate various process improvement methods, and they certainly tried to align incentives and recognize the contribution of people. And so that's what they did, but how they did it was a very subtle shift of power and authority. And I thought that that was very interesting and very thoughtful findings. The average firm, on the other hand, had very few high-level models. And the value of models to stimulate dialogue cross-functionally did not appear to be clearly understood. The average firm had way too many volume and cost-based metrics. In fact, they had so many metrics that they were hard-pressed to monitor all of them. They had some client-facing metrics, but the critical few metrics were not monitored with discipline at either the department level or the senior management level, and the client-facing metrics did not generally make it to the scorecard of the senior leadership team. For the average firm, process governance was not in place. The average firm focused to typical projects were of small scope, using many different approaches and very little evidence of an attempt to integrate the different approaches of Lean, Six Sigma, re-engineering, BPM, etc. And the average firm, there was little evidence of aligned recognition and reward systems. So that's basically the comparison between the leading firms and the average firms. And let me now share with you a few examples of leading process change. As I mentioned earlier, there's one example of success, which was outstanding, and there are two examples of that were not quite so successful, but I think we can learn a lot from them. And when I look at leading process change, I take a look at the three stages of getting ready, executing the improvements, and continuous improvement or process management. And I look for things like a compelling case for change. Compelling case for change is so important in terms of getting ready, looking at the business from the outside in, getting cross-functional collaboration, high-level models. I look for the right kind of pacing in carrying out the improvement. Making sure that we have a number of quick wins and early wins to maintain momentum. I look at methods, metrics, and collaboration. And in the continuous improvement or ongoing process management piece, I look at what the organization is doing to making it stick. Do they have process governance? Do they have aligned incentives? So those are some of the things that I look for. And let me share these three examples with you. The first example is an example in an insurance company of recruiting and onboarding, and that was a pretty great project. The next example was from a bank, a regional bank in the Northeast on mortgage processing, which could have been amazing, but ended up not being as good as it might have been. And the third example is an ERP-based transformation, business transformation effort that was based on a single instance of SAP to be deployed globally, which unfortunately did not succeed. So the insurance company that I'm talking about recognized that recruiting and onboarding agents was critical to their success, especially because they dealt through a network of independent agents and brokers. And so what they did is they modeled the process at a very high level. So basically, the regional sales managers would identify their requirements, how many people they would need. The HR folks would seek out applicants using different methods. HR and sales management would collaborate to make a selection. Legal would carry out background checks. HR would send out the package to hire the selected candidate, and marketing would then conduct orientation on the web-based tools that the newly hired insurance agent would have to use. And it would take generally on average 42 days. And the chief administrative officer understood that if they could reduce that 42 days by, say, 10 days, because they hired over 100 agents per month to fuel their regional expansion, their geographic expansion, and also to take into account the churn that happened, then that would mean significant increased revenues for the firm. So what they did is they took a look, they got all the right people together, they mapped this process out in a swim lane format. They had both a working team and a steering team. The steering team was comprised of the VP of Administration, VP of Sales, VP of HR, VP of Legal, and actually the VP of Sales also had marketing reporting to him. And they took a look to see where the problems were. And they found out that the problems were, first of all, that this whole identifying requirements and seeking applicants was all being done manually. So they implemented a document management system that really made that much better. And then they realized that there were no service level agreements for legal on doing background checks and for HR to publish or send out the hiring packages. And marketing was only conducting one web-based orientation per month. And so the VP of Administration, who was really the champion for this project, got the steering team together after the as-is analysis was shared with them, and they just made some policy changes. They made some policy changes in terms of SLAs for legal. They made policy changes in terms of getting the packages out to the candidates, the selected candidates, and they doubled. They went from 1 to 2 orientation per month for the new hires. And as a result, they went from 42 days to 26 days on average. Now, if you think about it, 100 new hires every month and 16 extra days, well, that's kind of like, what, 1,600 extra person days of sales effort. And the reason they were successful was they used a very high-level model. They had the steering team engaged. They quantified the potential benefit. They used not only technology, but they used collaboration by way of service level agreements. Very, very successful effort. In contrast, the next example on mortgage processing was less successful. This particular regional bank was concerned with the cost and performance of mortgage processing. For those of us who have had mortgages, we understand what this process is and how it works. The customer makes an inquiry and submits a mortgage application, which is then reviewed and verified. Then the underwriting decision is made. If it's positive, and then the funds are made available, the deal closes, and the post-close, of course, is collecting money from the applicant on a month-by-month basis. The problem was that the champion of this project, who was the vice president of operations, was mostly concerned with his own area. And he was reluctant to look at it end to end, and he was reluctant to really play the role he needed to play in leading the steering team. And yet the basic issues with this process were two things. One is 12% of mortgage applications were incomplete or inaccurate, and there was absolutely no triaging of various mortgage applications based on the amount of money that was being requested or the applicant, so blue chip clients of the bank got no preferential treatment whatsoever, and so there's real opportunity to improve the underwriting practices. Unfortunately, even though that the root causes were well understood, the organization never did get the requisite degree of collaboration, and the opportunity to significantly improve the mortgage process was never realized. The third example is even more telling, I think. It was a manufacturing company in the automotive aftermarket sector, and they were experiencing rapid expansion internationally, and they resolved to replace their legacy system with a single instance of an ERP system, and they decided to embrace business process excellence on a company-wide basis as the means for business transformation. And at first glance, it looked pretty good. They had great slides. They said business process management plus enabling IT systems equals business transformation, and it looked pretty good. They even had a process framework. They took the APQC process classification framework and they made some modifications to it. For example, product development they called art to part, and they had scheduled to produce. And the gray shaded areas were the areas that their ERP implementation would initially focus on. So it looked pretty good at the beginning, but then when we start to look at what they're doing in terms of the ERP system, we found that their ERP view was very much a data-driven view, not a customer-driven view, that they had not actually documented, analyzed, and improved the business processes that the ERP would enable. And they were looking at the world in terms of master data and credit management and accounts receivable, as opposed to a cross-functional customer-focused swim lane view. And even when it was possible for us to document the order to cash at a high-level process flow, indicating where process issues were and where process metrics were, and looking at the handoffs between departments, they really preferred their ERP view. And they never really embraced the cross-functional customer-focused process view at all. And as might be expected, as the project progressed, the ERP implementation fell further and further behind schedule and more over budget. And so the organization made a few big mistakes. They had a fragile case for change. They were focused on bolt-on technology solutions. They were more concerned about the structural issues, who reported to whom on the org chart, than they were about process. The pacing was inconsistent. They did not identify quick wins, early wins to maintain momentum. And there was inconsistent management attention. It was great at the beginning, but not so good at the end. So, practices of leading organizations. Again, to reiterate, the successful organizations in leading process change take advantage of high-level models, customer-focused metrics. They make an attempt to implement process-based governance. They try to integrate different improvement methods, and they try to align incentives. So those are a few examples, but let me share with you a little bit more about the specific aspects of these leading practices. So the models are simple, real, relevant, easy to consume, end-to-end process focus, and they're aligned with strategy. In fact, the single most important questions that the leading organizations appear to ask and answer is, which of our business processes need to be improved by how much for us to execute on our strategy. In terms of metrics, leading organizations look at the business from the outside in, and these are some of the metrics that they seem to measure. Perfect order or service delivery. Perfect means on time when it was promised, complete and error-free, first time right, inquiry, problem resolution, and variance to promise dates, whether it's for introducing new technology or whether it's introducing a brand new product or service. They measure variance to promises. They emphasize a guiding coalition where each member of the leadership team has a role to play, where the CFO adds critical to customer metrics to the scorecard. The CIO develops a business process architecture, and the VP HR emphasizes integration and recognition system alignment. And process owners are attempted to be implemented that have responsibilities for both leadership and performance management. But most of all, they focus on collaboration. And they understand that our process owner can only succeed when there's a critical mass of willing followers who are wholeheartedly committed to a common course of action. So that's basically a few examples. I'd like to wrap up, and I'd like to take maybe 10 minutes and talk about recent literature that I think is very thought-provoking and relevant. There's a university called the Singularity University, based in California, but with presence in Holland and elsewhere in the world. And three gentlemen from Singularity wrote this book called Exponential Organizations, and they shared some pretty amazing findings. First of all, they found that 89% of Fortune 500 companies from 1955 are not on the Fortune 500 list in 2014. They found that the recent companies like Uber, that was established in 2009, only took 2.5 years to reach a market cap of $1 billion, whereas the average typical financial Fortune 500 company took nearly 20 years to reach a market cap of $1 billion. So the environment is changing. Another publication found that some of the success factors in today's environment is such that incremental improvement, incremental innovation is simply not enough. And organizations have to go beyond incremental improvement in some authentic way that is networked, relevant, and intention different. And these findings are from a book called Digital Disruption by a gentleman called Wong. That is very interesting. And it's pretty well in line with what Leading Digital found, that digital masters build digital capability by reinventing customer experience, their business models and business processes. And more importantly, they build leadership capability to drive transformation. And if we remember that old adage of people, process, and technology, it's people that matter most. It's this mindset. It's looking at the business from the outside in that I believe will enable companies to transform in this digital age that we are in. Andrew McAfee co-authored a book called The Second Machine Age, and he said the new grand challenge is that digital technologies will continue to accelerate, but frankly, the skills of organizations and institutions are lagging behind. And I think that is just yet another voice that is reinforcing this view that technology and leading process change or leading business transformation are so entwined. Now, my view is in terms of leading business transformation, is that customer experience trumps process improvement. And if there's not a clear and enduring emphasis on creating more value for customers, it's not business transformation. I think there's a real opportunity for business process professionals to partner with customer experience professionals. Frankly, the customer experience movement has made more progress in appointing chief customer officers than the BPM movement has made in appointing chief process officers, but there's a real opportunity for collaboration there. I also think that if initiatives are not cross-functional, it's not business transformation. So this whole concept, we hear this all the time, companies engaging in finance transformation, I think that is fraught with danger. I think if the focus is solely cost reduction, it's not business transformation. So basically what we need is we need a mindset of looking at the business from the outside in a cross-functional context. The same book that I mentioned earlier, Exponential Organizations by these authors from Singularity University, talked about the transition from traditional organizational characteristics, what they call linear organizational characteristics, to exponential organization characteristics. And frankly, if you take a look at what's on the left-hand side and you take a look at what's on the right-hand side, I don't see large companies with the capability of doing that very well, moving from top-down hierarchical organization to autonomous social organizations, moving away from driven by financial outcomes to dashboards, moving from linear sequential thinking to experimentation and autonomy. I see that small, mid-sized organizations are well equipped to do that, but I think it's going to be challenging for large organizations. But I do think large organizations can do what MIT and Capgemini found in their 2011 study. And what they found is that customer experience, operational process focus, and business model innovation has to be integrated. So it's not a matter of or, it's a matter of and. Customer experience focus, process improvement, and business model innovation go together. So the question is really for every organization, what is your appetite for change? I mean, are you like that little guy in the picture eating that huge slice of watermelon? Do you have the appetite for change? And if you do, I think there's a huge opportunity. And basically, I'd like to leave you with a couple of thoughts. The late Steve Jobs said, you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards towards technology, not the other way around. And I think that's pretty good advice. And the well-known professor, Dr. Russell Ackoff, once said, it's better to do the right thing wrong than the wrong thing right. The former leads to learning, the latter to reinforcement of error. So let's do the right thing, even if we do it wrong. Let's try and do the end-to-end process improvement let's look at the business from the customer's point of view instead of doing the wrong thing right, which is small process improvements inside of departmental boundaries. That's what I have to share with you today, and I look forward to responding to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. That was really, really informative. I'm sure I speak for everyone on the call. I got a lot out of that. A lot of interesting information, a lot of very interesting statistics. So thank you very much. We're now accepting questions. I've been having some technical difficulty. I don't see any questions yet. Could anyone who's interested and has any questions, please key them in so that we might be able to present them to Andrew? Larry, are you getting any questions coming through?
I
Okay.
see one question there, and did you say this presentation will be available on the ABPMP website? I believe the answer is yes.
Yes, that's true. It will be. It'll take a couple days to get it out there, but certainly around the end of the week or Monday, you should be able to find it on the website. One of the things is we do have a restriction on the website that people really, to download these or to look at these, really need to be members. On the other hand, if you send in requests for the slides, we'll get those requests across to Andrew, and I'm sure he'll be happy to share at least part of the presentation with you.
I see a question there from Paul. The question is, in the RP example, why did the client insist on using data IT metrics instead of business process metrics, and who was the decision maker? The decision maker was the newly appointed VP of Business Process Excellence. And I honestly don't know what the answer is to that question. I was puzzled by the fact that the particular organization had a long history of incremental improvements using Lean Six Sigma, but it was done really at the manufacturing plant level, and not. There were a lot of departments that were not touched by the Lean Six Sigma effort, and yet there was enough awareness of using business process metrics and customer focus metrics in the organization that I think they had every opportunity to do that, but for some reason they didn't.
Okay, Andrew, we have another question then from Lynn Buckham, and
Yes?
you spoke about a subtle shift of power. Can you expand on that slightly?
Yes, so in traditional organizations, most senior executives wish to protect the turf in their department. Okay, and they focus, so what happens is if there is a problem, say at middle management level, that problem will be elevated, will be floated up to the senior executives in charge of the relevant departments, and the decision, the resolution of that problem will then be sent back down to the middle management levels. What happens when the organization looks at the business from the customer's point of view cross-functionally, what happens is that people delegate authority and power to mid-management levels, and the organization becomes more agile and more nimble. And it's very subtle. It's just, I mean, it's not, no one says, well, look, you're going to make this decision from now on, but it's just because of the cross-functional collaboration that there is this subtle shift of power. Does that make sense, Lynn?
Okay. Next question from Ron DeCamp. For
Right.
business transformations that fail, can you trace these to internal failures to follow the consultant's plan, or do the consultants not follow through on staying on site to keep the organization on course?
Well, that's kind of hard to say, Ron, but it's a great question. In my experience, most of the failures in business transformation are related to what the leadership team in the organization does or fails to do, much less related to what consultants do or do not do. My experience.
Okay. Now a question from Tio. How does information and knowledge management integrate into BPM that leads possibly or to going here. So I'll move on to the next question from George Mesveyer. And let's see, get this up here. Okay, from your experience, why do you think organizations continue to take an ERP view as opposed to a process view, yet this approach has failed in a lot of documented cases? Could the big ERP companies be part of the problem when they tell clients to tailor their processes according to the ERPs?
Okay, I got it, Dan.
And not vice versa.
Okay, I got it. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, George. That's a really interesting question. I think it's a couple of things. One is, of course, the ERP vendors and the systems integrators, they're trying to make money. They're selling their products and services that they have. And the fact of the matter is that ERP has proven to assist companies in many different ways. But there are many examples of ERP being implemented without a customer-focused business process point of view. And I think that there are multiple culprits. I think the systems integrators and the culture of the companies themselves and the implementation has a lot to do with it. I think this is a complex question, and I don't think there's a simple answer. But it's very interesting. Thank you for raising it.
Now a question, and this one is from an email address, so I'll just ask the question. How do you deal with the resistance to change, and how do you get the top management to buy into BPM?
Well, I think I made reference to that. I think simple, visually compelling models, facilitating a shared understanding of those models, asking instead of telling the way that should be done, raising questions that are thought-provoking to the leadership team, such as the one that I mentioned, which I think is absolutely key to ask and answer. And the question is this: which business processes need to be improved by how much for us to succeed in implementing our strategy? Okay, I think those are some of the things you need to do to engage the leadership team and help them see the merits of taking a customer-focused, business process-based view of the world.
Okay. And, okay, let's see. I'm not sure exactly what, I have a question here from Ron DeCamp. Is one more prevalent than the other? I'm not exactly sure what he's referring to.
I think he's referring to his previous question where he asked, what's more prevalent, the consultants failing or the company failing? And
Right.
and Ron, my experience, it's hard to say whether one is more prevalent than the other, but I think it's more common to see leaders within the organization not doing what's needed as opposed to the consultants doing something that doesn't work.
Okay, that completes the list of questions that I have at this point. We still have a little extra time to get into questions, so are there any questions? If so, please send them along. We have the privilege and advantage of having Andrew with us for a few more minutes, so I would urge everyone to take advantage of that and his expertise, and ask anything that you may have in mind relative to this topic. Okay, at least I'm not getting any other questions coming through at this point, Andrew.
Thank you, Dan. I've got my website on that last slide, and people are invited, if they do have questions, they can send me emails through the website or comments, or even directly. All you have to do is Google me. I would be delighted to respond to any questions that anyone might have. And Dan, thank you for the opportunity to present these thoughts to the people at ABPMP.
Andrew, and thank you for joining us today and sharing your thoughts with us. As I said before, I got a lot out of this. I think this was great, and several of the comments agreed with that. So thank you very much, Andrew. And
Thank
with
you, Dan.
that,
Have a good... Go ahead.
and with
Go ahead.
that, I will close today's session. And certainly Andrew will answer any questions that come to him. I'll also be happy to answer any questions about ABPMP or the webinar series that you may have if you send them into the company or into the association. Ran out of breath there. So thank you again for joining us today, and Andrew, thank you. Bye now.